If you click on this video, I want to congratulate you for taking an interest in the CFA Level 1 exam. The CFA program can be very daunting, but even if you're just thinking about it, you recently started, or you're halfway there in the studying for Level 1, I can guarantee you this video will help you. I talked to a lot of CFAs and then I took a lot of notes when I was studying in order to combine these 10 tips that made me be able to pass and get a very good score in the exam. And after watching a lot of videos here on YouTube and reading a lot of vlogs online where I found a lot of helpful information, I decided to make my tips a little different to try to add something new to what you already find out there. But before I get into it, I want to encourage you to subscribe. I will be doing 2 extra videos about the CFA, one next week where I cover study methods, which gives a detailed breakdown of the steps that I followed in order to pass the CFA. And the week after that, I will be covering CFA motivation, which is something that I haven't seen any videos or articles about, and I think it's something crucial that I want to share with you guys. And now, let's get to my 10 tips. Now, the first tip is create a study plan. Now, I know I said that my tips were gonna be different, and they will be, so stick with me for a second. The reason why a study plan is so important is because it doesn't only keep you organized, it's gonna tell you when you fall behind or when you get ahead. If you fall behind by a reading or two, that's not a big deal, but when you start noticing that you're a few weeks behind, that's a very big issue. So, to give you an example, let's look at the study plan that I created. So I'm gonna point out 3 things. The first thing is, as you can see here, the first 2 weeks, I started by only doing 2 readings a week because I knew that I was starting to get into the habit of studying, and you have to start slow. That's the first thing. The second thing is, you see that I only do 3 readings a week because more than 3 readings, it's really not feasible and it's not attainable. And also you see that the weeks that I knew I wasn't gonna study, in this case, it was the week of December because it was Christmas, I already planned for not studying that week. And the last thing is that the last 4 weeks I do review, but that's something that I'm gonna talk in tip number 8. The next tip is time your hours. And a lot of people hate on this, but I'm actually a big fan. The reason why I think you should time your hours is because it's gonna give you a quantitative measure of how much effort you're putting into the exam. There's nothing that guarantees that if you study 300 or even 350 hours, you will pass. That is not a rule. However, timing your studying with a stopwatch that you literally stop every single time you take a break or you look at your phone is gonna give you a measure of how much effort you're actually putting in. Next week, I'm gonna cover a more detailed breakdown about how I did my hours, but a very simple rule was that 16 to 20 hours a week were really good, usually broken down to 2 hours each weekday, and then 3 to 5 hours on Saturday and 3 to 5 hours on Sunday. But subscribe so you can see all the details in next week's video. Test prep plus environments. There's a lot of people that just study for the CFA by using the CFA environment. And there's a lot of people that just study for the CFA by using the test prep environment. I'm a fan of doing both. I think that the main focus is the test prep. In my case, I use Kaplan Schweitzer, which I believe it's the most common or the one that people use the most. Maybe you don't pronounce it that way, so let's just call it Kaplan. But I will also compensate by doing questions from the CFA environment. The questions from Kaplan are usually harder than the questions that you see in exam day. However, doing also the questions from the CFA environment can be a good mix to also start getting more prepared and acquainted with the questions that are going to be similar to those on the actual exam. So I like doing a mix of both. Focus on the learning outcome statements. Huge. So the learning outcome statements are basically the guidelines of what you need to know about each topic. What is important is that you focus on the wording for each learning outcome statement. So every single time you're reading or you're doing a reading, make sure that you read the learning outcome statement and you focus on each word. Let me give you an example. So, learning outcome statement 2.M. It says interpret kurtosis. The focus here is interpret. So you learn what kurtosis is, which by the way, it's very important. And then when you get to the other side of the material, you see that they give you the formula. The learning outcome statement did not say calculate. So you're not gonna need the formula. You just need to understand what it is and be able to explain and rationalize once you see a graph or they give you numbers. So it's important that you look at the formula and you understand it, but since they don't say calculate, you don't really need to memorize it or even write it down. However, if you see the word calculate, you better memorize that formula and you better know it. So focus a lot on the learning outcome statements. Next one. Ethics goes last. Not a lot to say here, but ethics is a lot of memorization, so you want to do it as close to the test as possible. A great order of how you should study for this exam can be just what Kaplan, or even I think the CFA is the same, gives you, which is this. However, on a side note, usually when you get to level 2, you don't really follow that anymore because starting with quant can be very hard. But for level 1, I say you can follow that and that's good enough. 6, become a formula master. The CFA exam can be very hard. However, you're gonna be impressed that a lot of questions in the exam for level 1 are gonna be very easy. So let me give you an example that's gonna sound very complicated if you haven't looked at the material yet. If you get asked a question of how European or American waterfall structures benefit limited partners or general partners more, that's a very hard question because that requires you to know what European waterfall is, what American waterfall is, and how they affect limited partners and general partners. So that's the type of question that you might forget on exam day and get wrong. And you can afford to get a few of those wrong. However, if you get asked the question of calculate the break-even point or the operational break-even point, that's a very simple question because all you need to know is the formula, which is not hard at all, and literally grab the information, plug, chug, and answer it. So you need to become a formula master because there's a few questions that you simply can get wrong. And next week, I'm gonna teach you about how to become a formula master and how I did it and scored very well, especially the ones that require a lot of formulas. So subscribe. Talking about subscribing, subscribe to the CFA question of the day. So the CFA question of the day is something offered by Kaplan that basically sends you a question every single morning around 6 to 8 a.m. It's a great way for a few reasons. One, it's gonna keep you accountable. When you start doing the questions, they're gonna be very hard because they're gonna be asking you questions about material that you probably haven't covered. However, I will always recommend that you give it a try, give an educated guess, and click on it to see why you got it wrong or if you got it right. 2, it's gonna show your progress. So as you start studying more, you're gonna see developments, you're gonna start covering more material, and you're gonna start getting more questions right. And 3, you're gonna see where you're standing. If you start getting a lot of questions right many days in a row, you're doing great. If not, well, the last month is to practice. So going back to my first tip, remember the schedule. You see that the last 4 to 5 weeks, I like more 5 weeks, you need to set aside to just review. So when you set your schedule, you have to plan that you need to finish covering all the material a month or even 5 weeks before the exam. The reason for that is because studying for the CFA is gonna take, 4 to 6 months, usually close to the 6-month mark. So by the time that you get to month 5, you're gonna have forgotten a lot of the material or need to refresh on a lot of the material from the first month. So that last month can actually be the difference between you passing or not passing. So you have to plan ahead from that. And that last week before the exam, if you can take it off work, if you're working full time, that's very important. I know it can be hard, and I know a lot of people can afford it, but what I would recommend is as soon as you sign up for the exam, put it on your schedule that you're gonna be taking time off. It is currently February, and I'm taking my exam in August for level 2, and I already have my time set aside for the weeks that I'm taking off in August. Talking about the last month, you're also gonna be doing a lot of mocks, but that brings me to my next point, which is do not over-rely on mocks. Mocks are very important because they're gonna show you how the test is like. They're gonna, build the endurance of being able to go around for 4 hours and a half, as long as the exam is. However, the mocks don't really teach you anything. The mocks are gonna show you where you're standing. If you dedicate 4 hours and a half for a mock, which is, exam, or 5 hours when you take into account the break, you need to plan for 5 hours or even more for reviewing the mock, because not reviewing a mock after taking it, it's actually kind of useless. So you should do 5 to 6 mocks. I think I did 5, which are 3 Kaplan and then 2 CFA. But don't think that that's gonna count as practice, because it's not. It's just gonna show you where you're standing and give you that confidence. Which brings me to my last point, which is the most controversial, which is set the 70% mark. When you look at online and also what the CFA has released, the passing mark for level 1 average over the last 10 years was a 70%. That means that if you score above a 70%, the odds are with you for passing. And if you score below, the odds are kind of stacked against you. The CFA is hard. like I said. And when you face that exam day, you're gonna feel a little overwhelmed, which is normal because you've been prepping for many months, and you're about to take one exam that's gonna last 4 hours, and then that's it. The only way you can build up the confidence of knowing that you're gonna do well is by having a good track record of having performed well. If you score consistently below the 70s, there's a chance that you might pass the exam, and a lot of people have done it. However, the odds are stacked against you and you're a little more unlikely. Nowadays, the exam changed. So you first have many more opportunities every single year of taking the exam, different than the past that you only had one opportunity. And two, you can simply reschedule the exam by simply paying $400. $400 is a lot of money, but if you spend some time saving, it's something that you probably can't afford or even your employer is willing to pay. I wouldn't have made this tip 2 years ago when the exam was different. By now that you have this opportunity to reschedule, it's actually something that I recommend. Taking the exam after you fail it is proven to be very hard because the motivation is very low. So I think that if you don't have that confidence of having scored above a 70, you should reschedule it. But once again, it's a controversial topic and it's probably my hottest take out of these 10 tips. And that's it. If you have any questions about the exam or any of my tips, or there's any other videos that you want to see in this channel about the CFA, make sure that you leave it in the comments. I really do my best at answering all the questions that you guys put there, and I've done it with my videos with the SIE, the Series 7 or the Series 66, and it creates a good conversation that can help other people as well. Make sure that you subscribe so you can see the 2 videos that I'm going to be doing over the next 2 weeks, and I'll see you next time. Peace!